Hello, hello, all those beautiful faces. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. To live free, you have to think free. And that is exactly what we do here on this show. And tonight I have with me Bradley Beck, a distinguished Toastmaster. I called him a champion on my Twitter. I was told that that's not the correct language, but he is a distinguished Toastmaster. Bradley Craig Beck. You can check him out over at bradleycraigbeck.com. And I see you survived the eclipse. Welcome.
It's not dark here. I'm in Colorado, and it's a beautiful day. Wind stopped blowing, and so I'm ready to rock and roll tonight.
All right. And we're talking to a Toastmaster. I've had the pleasure of seeing you give toasts in person on multiple occasions, and you command the stage. You construct a great narrative. You're funny, you're engaging. And I think that this is such an important skill for people who want, whether you consider yourself a liberty-minded person or a progressive or a Republican, whoever you are, we have to be effectively engaging in communication. So I thought tonight you could share with us some of the art of public speaking, um, both in how to give a speech, but then also how can we take those skills and then look at people who are doing public speaking on TV and crowds at events and say and critically analyze what they're doing, like not get caught up in the hype and make sure that we are being critical thinkers, because I think sometimes that's about the art of public speaking, right? Is you want to get the crowd swept up in your story and not have them thinking about all these other things. So it's an interesting balance. But before we get into that, let people know a little bit more about yourself and your Toastmaster chops.
Sure. Well, I started Toastmasters in 2005, and back then I still am a salesman and going on the road selling floral supplies for several different companies. And I always felt a little rusty when I went back out on the road. So my wife at the time had a chamber Toastmasters club that they were forming. I thought, oh, let me go check this out. So I went and I really enjoyed the experience. And then I joined. And then, after I went through the leadership program, the Rockies in 2009, I was challenged to do something because you spend 9 months going through the process of learning about individual rights, the proper role of a limited government, and how to be an active and engaged citizen, all based on protecting those rights. And so when I was challenged to do something, I said, well, I know how to do public speaking. And I found my fellow classmates not able to articulate those ideas with stories that made a point. So I took that Toastmasters experience and I asked a few of my fellow classmates, hey, let's start doing some of these Toastmaster skills and incorporating these ideas of liberty. And so we did that. And lo and behold, we started four additional clubs. Two are still out there. One's Liberty Toastmasters in Denver, and the other's Liberty Toastmasters North in Longmont, Colorado. And we meet for a full 2 hours on alternating Saturdays from 10 to 12. And we practice those traditional skills in Toastmasters, but we blend it with those timeless principles of what we call in the leadership program of the Rockies, those timeless things that our founders talked about in taverns and talked about at Independence Hall, about how do you make a message connect with people, and especially at the heart, to get that to connect at the head. So I used it primarily for business, making business presentations. But over time, I have instructed folks who are either running for public office or that are in some sort of issue and wanting to get better at connecting to audiences. So a little bit about me, a little bit about my background.
Awesome. Well, and you already started to get into a little bit of the topic here, right? About what makes a good public speaker and what makes things engaging. But let's go ahead and really dive in from the beginning, I guess, right? Because like it doesn't start when you just get up on stage. Before you get on stage,
Yeah.
you have to craft your narrative, right? And I think that I know for me, something that I always like to do is I like to start with a story, right? And I think that a lot of times people kind of like skip over that part and they like to get right to the moralizing. They like to get right to the, well, this is what you should do. But again, like you said, you can't really get to somebody's head successfully unless you go in through their heart, right? You have to open them up so that they can actually accept these ideas. So tell me a little bit about your process when you all right, I want to give a speech to this crowd about whatever the topic is, whether it's a political issue, whether it's a local community issue, whether it's just something funny, right? Sometimes you pick something, about which TV show is better. How do you start thinking about this? How do you approach?
That it's a great question because I even step back a little further. And the first thing I'd like to know is how long do I have to speak? And do I know my rate of speaking? And one little technique to understand that better is to read a page out loud for 1 minute. Could be a book, a magazine, a newspaper. Uh, just reading out loud for 1 minute and then stopping at 1 minute and counting the words and doing that 3 times. And then having a adding up that total, those 3 times, and dividing by 3, you get your rate of speaking. And so most women on average are about 150 words per minute. Most men are about 125. And I won't comment on that, why that, but so let's say you speak at 150 words per minute and you
We
have
have
three
more
minutes,
ideas in our head, obviously.
and we're trying to funnel those thoughts. But let's say you have 3 minutes to speak at a town hall meeting or a school board meeting, and if you go over that time limit, you don't know your rate of speaking, you're going to be cut off. So if you speak 150 words per minute, you have 450 words that you can say, but you don't want to cram all those words in by just speaking fast and trying to get them all there. You want to have cadence. You want to have the ability to pause. You want to have humor if you can, revealing humor, not a joke. And so one of the things you want to do is write it out. But as David Brooks, who's a world champion of public speaking down in Texas, always says, is that you have to know what your writing is about so you can edit. And when you edit, you become better at speaking. Writing helps you clarify your thoughts. And so I never say throw it completely away once you're editing because you might use that material for something else. But you always want to write it down and then edit it and edit it and edit it to where it comes out conversationally. So that's the first thing, is to know your rate of speaking. Then with the end in mind, I want to know, what are you speaking about? What do you want your audience to understand? So there's a couple different techniques that you can use. One from a gentleman who I learned, another world champion of public speaking. His name is Dana Lamont out of Southern California. And Dana talks about the hook, the hammer, and the hinge. Kind of like we're all taught about, tell us what you're going to tell us, tell us what you told us. I like his alliteration better. One, I can say it, and two, I can remember it. But the hook, how do you grab people's attention? So a lot of times you can start off with a quote or an engaging question in terms of the audience or something that's provocative. So if I'm talking, let's say, to a left-leaning audience, it's political, but I want to get their attention, I might start off with something like, Grover Cleveland was one of the last most conservative Democrat presidents we ever had. He said, quote, the people trust the government and support it, but the government should not support the people. End of quote. And so that kind of gets people interested. That's, use the term Democrat with conservative, and what I'm trying to do there is bridge the gap between what people's preconceived ideas are. So then I would transition into the hammer, which would be something like telling a story, as you mentioned, but to make a point. It has to have a point, and that's what anchors it. So, as an example, I have 3 beautiful granddaughters. My oldest one, Libby, and all my granddaughters were at our son's graduation from Belmont University, first graduating class of their law school in Nashville. And so the whole family was there, and everybody after the event had to go use the necessary room. Go imagine. So there on a plaque, as my granddaughter came out, there was a plaque commemorating the Apollo astronauts and the landing on the moon. So I looked at Libby and I said, Libby, who was the first man on the moon? And with a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of gusto, she said, Louis Armstrong. Well, she got half of it right. And what that allows me to do is take that little story and talk about we as adults often say things or think things and we get things half right. Or I can use it in a bunch of different ways, but that little story, a personal experience, it has humor. And people always say, do I have to use humor in my speech? And I always say, yes, if you want to be accepted by your audience, because when we laugh, we relax. And when we relax, people want to hear what's next. That's from Jeffrey Gitomer. So you want to make sure that you can reveal humor. That's why I write out my presentations, because then I can find out places, oh, that would be an excellent place to inject some humor. And especially if you're dealing with a political crowd, a town hall meeting, and things could be tense, humor disarms people. If you can get them to smile or laugh. And again, I'm not saying tell a joke, but I am saying use something that gets people a little bit more in their own skin, a little bit more relaxed in what you're going to say next. So you got the hook, you got the hammer, then you transition into the hinge. The hinge is like a hinge of a gate, it opens and closes. And that's your call to action. What do you want me to do after I just spend 3 minutes, 2 minutes telling you a little story, telling you some ideas? And my call to action is to vote, write an op ed, take some sort of action that is going to move the ball down the field. So that's the first structure I like to always talk about. It's a Toastmaster structure that's been very successful for me and for a lot of other folks.
Yeah, I've used that structure as well. I mean, I went through the same training program as you, and I believe they teach that in there, along with a couple other formulas. The thing that that's very important, like you said, though, is to know your timing, because you definitely want to be able to get to that hinge, right? There's nothing like setting up a great story, drawing people in, and then being like, sorry, the buzzer's over, right?
Right.
So sometimes I like to like front load my call to action real
Right.
quick. I'll be like, all right, this is what we're gonna do up front, and then I like get into my story, and then I remind people what my call to action is as well at the end as well.
Right. Well, and there's other ways you can do it. Like, for instance, as you went through the um, leadership program, the Rockies version in Connecticut, one of the things that one of the speakers talks about, Mark Montini, has a great formula, and it's M equals EC to the third power, which is
Yes.
the play on Einstein. And the idea there is is M, message, equals the emotion that you want to elicit from your audience. You have to have that in the forefront of your mind. What emotion do you want the audience to feel and to participate in? And then you have the three C's, which are to connect, to contrast, and to have credibility. So we can take each one of those on. The first thing being the emotion. And there's 6 universal emotions that about 95% of all cultures have. And that is the emotion of happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, disgust, and fear. One of those 6 emotions should be in the forefront of what you're going to be speaking about. Why? Because again, if we connect at the heart first, we can get to agreement on some issue. And once we're at agreement, then we can get to finding out what's important to our audience. And then you can go down to the facts and figures. A lot of liberty oriented people want to just get out all the facts and figures first. And those who we're trying to persuade are sitting there go, wait, back up. Too much facts and figures first. So it's just like in sales, you've got to be knowing, you've got to ask questions, you've got to have the ability to be likable before you start to push your facts, your figures, your information down. So it's agreement coming down to what's important, and then you can get into all the facts and figures of the idea,
Details.
the details.
Exactly.
So that's the first thing, the emotion. But then you want to figure out on those 3 C's the connection. How do you connect with your audience? Stories that have a point, humor, but you also want to connect at where they're at. So I do a lot of research depending on who I'm speaking at. I just did a presentation on an article I wrote for the Kim Munson show here on KLZ 560 in Denver. And so I co-host a lot with her, but sometimes I have the privilege of running the whole show. And this article I wrote entitled IR is the New AI. And the AI portion of it attracted some people to come. There's probably 35, 40 people in this audience when I was speaking live. And I asked the question, how many of you came here for the title AI? And, most of the hands went up. I said, good, because we'll come back to that. The first thing I want to talk about is the IR, which is individual rights, is the new American individualism. A little play on words, and talked about AI and where it's going. But more importantly, I wanted to get people's mindset in the idea of connecting with them first. And so I had a little contrast. So that's that third or second C actually is the contrast of IR to AI and their thinking where they were. But I took them on a little different path. And then you have the credibility. The credibility I had with them is many of them had heard me on the radio prior, and I had spoken to this group several times before. So the credibility, the trust, the reason for them to showing up is because I had been to this group and spoke to them. But more importantly, they came away in the past feeling fulfilled. And I gave them the information and the hope that they were looking for. So there's another consideration as well. So it's the message equals emotion, 3 C's, contrast, connection, and credibility.
Yeah, and the thing that I like about these formulas as well is, that the first time I write something is like, I just write, like, it's a lot. You usually overwrite. Sometimes you can't come up with ideas, so you're like way underwriting, right? But usually you way overwrite, you write a bunch of stuff that's not even related, and you're like, what was I doing here? Like, you know? But then you get down your idea, and then you can go through these different little categories, and it really helps you hone in and refine your ideas. And I would say the contrast one is one that really helps me, because that's how people think. We think this versus that, right? It's almost like in economics, you have opportunity cost. It's like what's and it's just between two things, right? You can do this or you can do that. And a lot of times when you do that initial writing, you have like these sort of like really complex ideas. You can't write exactly say them, but then when you think about it in those contrasting terms, I just have to simplify it into a simple this and a simple that. And you get rid of all the extra stuff. Because a lot of times when you're telling a story, it's not exactly like it happened, or it's not exactly like you thought it. Because,
Well,
you
a
know,
lot of times when you write it down, you get clarity because the one thing, especially in a short speech, you want to make sure is that you are concise and clear. You know in your head where you're taking the audience. And what's really funny is people tell me all the time, I can't give enough information in 2 to 3 minutes. And I always laugh and say, well, have you read the Gettysburg Address lately? Because that was 262 words that fundamentally put the nation back on the track of our founders. Up until that time, just prior to the Civil War, a lot of people were saying, the founders, there was a generation or two in advance of them, and the world was changing. The Industrial Revolution had happened, and there was a lot of new things happening innovation-wise at that time, from about 1860 to the turn of the 19th century. And so when Lincoln got up there and did his 262 words, and people often ask, how long did it take him to write that? And our friend Thomas Cranwetter will always say, well, his lifetime, because if you read several of his previous speeches, especially the House Divided speech and Cooper Hall, you find that Lincoln is already thinking about these things, and he really perfected a lot of his speaking style by going back to his father's house after he was in the legislature and reading Euclid. He committed to memory all 6 books of Euclid because he wanted to demonstrate how to come about to an idea. And so here's a guy who was what we wouldn't say formally educated, who read the Bible, who read Shakespeare, and he read Euclid. And I've tried to read Euclid, and it's difficult. So, I mean, kudos to him. But 262 words that fundamentally reestablish America on a path that the founders had put it on. And I just find that amazing.
I like that. I'm gonna start using that as
Yeah.
way to stay concise and some inspiration on that end. And I think too, it also brings about again just that process of refining and getting better. I like the tip of maybe a way that somebody who's out there who's trying to get better at being a public speaker is do somebody else's speech, right? Or
Yeah.
try to practice the different cadences or the different styles and see what suits you. Or and I would imagine that even just practicing in a style that you're like, wow, I totally butchered that or I'm not good at that would still even give you value because you're thinking about the words, you're looking at it from a different perspective. So I like that. If there's anybody out there who's just not sure where to start, can say, "Oh, I'm a bad public speaker," this or that, just try performing somebody else's speech, for yourself in the mirror and take it to a
Yeah.
Toastmasters club after that.
Yeah. Joining Toastmasters will make a difference in people's delivery because most people come to get better at oral communication, but they leave if they do leave. I probably will never leave, but if you do leave afterwards, you become a better listener because so much of what we do in Toastmasters is listening. And if you actively listen, like we're having a conversation, but we're both listening to each other and not waiting our turn to talk, but really listening and hearing, you can say, well, this is what I heard you say, Stephanie. Correct me if I'm wrong, or I'm just curious, how did you come up about that idea? And so this dialogue happens. And I always laugh when people say, well, I'm fearful of public speaking because people are looking at me. And you go to coffee or dinner or, whatever, breakfast with somebody, and you're talking to them and you're looking at them and they're looking at you. The only difference with public speaking is one of us is standing. We have people in front of us. So if you're really uncomfortable, nothing wrong with sitting on a stool and speaking. Again, depends on the audience and where you are, but you can start there. But just standing in front of people and then recording yourself, hearing your voice, getting used to using a microphone. One of the biggest things I find when people are around a microphone is they don't like the sound of their voice. So practicing with a microphone, making sure it's up here, not down by their belly button, using it for alliteration, using it for fast to slow or slow to fast, soft, pausing, or getting a little louder. I mean, your voice is your tool, and so you have to use it as a violin would, soft to loud or fast to slow, or vice versa. And practicing that, once you get your structure together, is how do you want it to sound? Because people, when you're doing a speech, yes, they're looking at you, but they're also looking at your body language. How are you using your hands? How are your eyes? Are you expressive? Do you look authentic? Or are you just looking down and they're seeing the top of your head and they don't see your eyes, so there's no connection here. But as soon as I come up and you see my eyes and you see my face, and then I smile, you get the reflection back of another smile. And so those are some of the things that you want to think about as you progress with your presentation.
And of course, you get to the point where you're not nervous, right? Like,
Well, it's like the joke, my I told my wife once that I was speaking to a very important group of people. And I said, I don't know how to open it up. I don't know how I'm going to really approach it. I've written it down, but I need some way to hook them, get that start going. And she said, well, whatever you do, don't sound intelligent or sophisticated or charming. Just be yourself. I mean, put um it's a little bit of self-effacing humor, but what the point being is, if you can get people to smile in the beginning, you're more likely to connect with them, and then you can go on. So
yeah.
there's some little techniques or tips that you can use in getting yourself comfortable. So breathing exercises work. You can breathe in through your nose and do that
I
two or
just
three
feel
times.
like I'm always nervous though, like, even it doesn't matter, you can go up on there, you can give a bunch of speeches. I mean, I've been to rallies and I've been to, I've done plug-in, your event that you host and stuff, and it doesn't matter. I'm always nervous before I go up there, and I just feel like you just gotta push through that wall. or like I remember when I first started public speaking, or when I first started teaching, because I taught for like 5 or 6 years, I would like black out. I would just like you just like go up there, you black out, you're like, well, I hope I did good because I don't remember a thing I said. But I did sometimes I would video record myself so I could go back and watch. But then also it's just like I don't know, I feel like you just gotta push through that, and it gets a little bit easier, even if you still are nervous, you just know to yourself, "Alright, I just gotta push through this wall. Once I break through, once I get that first smile from somebody in the audience," or, I like to, like, lock eye contact with a few people and, like, really make sure they're in it with me. But yeah, once you get that first laugh, then you're like, "Alright, I'm good, I'm good."
Right.
Um
Well, and one of the things you bring up a great point is that people who don't know their material well should be nervous. So if you know your material, you know what you want to say, then you should be a little more confident. You might be a little bit, butterfly-ish at the beginning. So one of the things that I learned early on, I like to stand at the front of a venue, front door, or wherever people are accessing the event, and stand there and shake people's hands, introduce myself. Because then when I get on stage or when I start to speak, I've met most of the people who are coming through the door. Now I can look at them and I've already contacted them via the eye, via the hand, and it calms me down. So I'm not nervous. I don't have the butterflies on. I always like to say, you want to put your butterflies in formation so they all go in unison. And people who are nervous oftentimes are nervous because they're not confident in the information they're trying to say, and they're afraid that people are judging them. Well, your audience is judging us right now. They may be tuned in by the millions, or there might be, 10 of us sitting here having a conversation listening. We don't know. But what we do know is if we have good information that we can share with folks, then there might be more people who are not going to turn the channel or, multitask and kind of tune you out. So part of it is practice. Darren LaCroix is a world champion of public speaking, often says stage time, stage time, stage time, meaning practice, 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 and then practice some more. You're always wanting to practice and change things up. And there's a lot of what ifs. So, what
Mhm.
if the sound system goes out? What if your slides go out? What if, what if? Well,
If
you
you
got to be
forget
prepared.
what if you forget where you are, you lose your place?
I got a great story about that. I was in a Toastmasters contest. So I won my club, I won the area, I went on to the division. And it was in a big hall. It was about 150 people in the room. I knew most of the people. And they drew straws. I think there was 8 of us, and I got chosen. I drew the 8th straw. And I thought, oh, what a great position to be in. So they call my name. I go up there. I start my presentation, and it was like eating a bucket of ice cream. I just froze. My head, boom. I couldn't remember anything. And so I tried to start again. I just paused and, kind of wiped my brow and took a breath and started speaking again. And I couldn't remember my speech. And the reason I couldn't remember it is because I had memorized it rather than internalized it.
Mhm.
And if you've ever tried to memorize something and you mess up by 1 or 2 words, you're going to lose your train of thought. And that's what happened to me. As soon as the contest was over, I got in my car and it all came back. But only in Toastmasters do you get a standing ovation for failure. I mean, I had people I know say, "Oh, that's happened to me before," and I got people clapping. And the funny part was that the Toastmaster I happen to know, and they interview in between the judges counting up the ballots for who was the best speaker that day. And I happen to know her, and I said, "Amy, I have a question for you before you interview me." I asked her if there was Viagra for public speaking because next time I wanted to go a little longer. But um, but I could be humorous, I could be self-effacing, and then, like I said, I went to the car and the whole thing came right back to me. So try not to memorize, try to internalize what you want to say. You can have note cards, you can have keynote phrases, but reading, anytime you're going to read, send me the notes. I'll read it on my own time then. What you want to do is connect with your audience via the eye, via the face. those little tidbits will help you connect with an audience, and people want you to be successful.
Now we have a question in the chat saying, when is it better to write a speech versus go freestyle? Now I would imagine, like you said, if you have time to prepare. But are there times maybe when you have to speak really? Yeah, I have some good ideas. I'll just freestyle this, or say somebody asks you to speak last minute and you have to freestyle. How do you approach this?
That's a great question. So at Toastmasters, we have a section called Table Topics, and that's where somebody asks you a question, and you can say, "That's a great question. I'm going to talk about the dog or the weather or whatever you're familiar with." I always like to take the challenge, but in freestyling and in speaking just extemporaneously, I'm always practicing anyways. So I'm prepared. If somebody says, "Brad, the speaker's not here. Can you give us 10 minutes on something?" Sure, because I've been practicing. Anytime you have an opportunity to speak and you are asked to just get up there and stall, or somebody asks you a question about like this one, I love it because it gives me an opportunity to take some of those tidbits and things I've been practicing and put it into fruition to where I can actually just go out and speak. So freestyling is great. It just, where are you doing it? What's the venue? If you're going to do it to a business meeting and you're not prepared and you're just going to speak, I'd reconsider it. School board meeting, you want to connect with the audience, and more importantly, the audience around you, not necessarily the folks on the dais. So you want to be prepared. You want to have maybe a quote at the beginning and at the end to bookend it. So I practice a lot of that. I practice a lot of keeping the emotion down but the passion up. Because a lot of times when you're freestyling, stuff comes out of your mouth and you're going, I wish I didn't say that. So you've got to practice and try to figure out, okay, what are the situations I might be called to? And so you can bring your A game every time you're asked to do freestyling.
Yeah. I would think, again, it's one of those things that it's a little bit of practice. I think always good for a freestyle personal story, right? Something that connects, something that you don't have to like think about or recall a quote or facts and statistics. It's your life, something that you can relate to.
Mhm.
Or just, a current event, something that's going on the news that everybody kind of has some ability to relate to. And I do try to, if I have to like do something, somebody's like, hey, in 5 or 10 minutes, can you speak? Or later on in this event, can you speak? I do try to at least just like get a little bit time of way and write down a few bullet points so
Right.
that I can, and I feel like usually once I write something down and like think about it, I'm like, okay. And then you can always have it for a little reference if you need to remind yourself.
Right.
Um, but yeah,
Okay.
again, practice. And if you're a teacher, I feel like, it was a teacher who asked that question, like, we have a lot of practice at this, right? Sometimes you gotta freestyle, a kid asks a question, or, the lesson that you thought you were gonna teach today is not actually the lesson you're gonna teach today, or whatever it is. So I'm sure you got the skills to freestyle when you need to.
And asking questions too.
Oh, that's a good
You
one.
know, asking questions. I'm just curious is a great way to say it. Why do you ask that question? I'm just curious. I want to know more about your thoughts on this subject because I have an opinion, but I want to understand where you're coming from. And a lot of
I like
times
that,
that
I
helps.
like that, throw it back at 'em. Alright, we're gonna get some audience participation going on here, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is you're not an expert on everything. So a question might be posed and you say, well, I'm not sure about that. I'm curious what you're thinking, or tell me more because I
Right.
don't know what you're really referencing. So I want to get that perspective.
Mhm.
And a lot of times that helps. And that's where the table topics comes in, especially if you're running for a position, an elected official or a committee, and you're being interviewed. There's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know, but let's connect afterwards and let's talk about it. Or if you have a white paper or a reference that I can read, and then we can get back together and have coffee and discuss it.
I like that too. Never be scared to say you're not sure. It's a
Yeah.
good response.
I'm
Uh,
married. I say it all the time.
oh man, all right, we gotta teach that one to mine. Um, so I wanted to transition over now. I mean, if you have anything else you would like to add on to the like how to do the public speaking or craft your speech and your narrative, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I have studied a lot I love history and I love the history of business. And there's a guy named John H. Patterson who didn't find, but he actually bought and expanded a little company you may have heard of in Akron, Ohio called National Cash Register. And he used to train his salespeople to use their hands when they were discussing the benefits of his product, how people could overcome objections using their hands. He always did the fives. And one of the things I learned over time was, okay, if I'm trying to think about something, I can use my fingers to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and remember a point. So it might be something like, and I teach this as well to folks that are interested. First, there's the heart, that emotional connection. So I think about the heart. Then I think about humor. How am I going to get people to laugh and relax? Then I think about the head. Is it something that they can put in here? And then is it something that is heavy duty? Is it significant? Can it make an impact? But the most important one to me is the hustle. Will they get up and do something about it? Our actions plus our choices plus our actions create our character. And so will they get up and really do something with what you just talked about? So there's fives, and I use John Patterson's 5 fingers. It also could be used in a way to remember like the first five principles or ideas in our First Amendment, like RAPS, religion. Um, you can do. I just lost the A. You don't remember. Assembly, religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. Those are the first five rights in our First Amendment. So you can use your fingers for something like that. So,
Okay, and it's just something about the connection between the physical and the thought that helps maintain that?
right. And you can do it nonchalantly. So you're not having to memorize. You can just kind of touch your fingers and go, okay, they're there. So it's
Mm.
5 points. Odd numbers seem to work better, at least for me. Threes, fives, sevens. But I like the five because I got 5 digits in my hand.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I like that a lot. Yeah, using your hands not just to bring people in, but to as a device, like, it's almost like it's not a mnemonic device, but it's something like that, right?
Yeah,
Where
sure.
you're helping to remind yourself. Yeah,
Right.
I picture things. I usually create a little picture in my mind or have, like, some big images that I'm jumping from one thing to the other to help me stay on track where I am. So, I feel like it's a similar technique there. What I wanted to transition into was, okay, now we have those skills or we have the knowledge we need to practice these skills. How do we then critically watch somebody giving a speech, right? Because now we know, okay, they're using these techniques to pull us in emotionally and take down our guard and connect with us. And they do this on TV, they do this in advertisements, politicians do this. So how do you then take those skills to be a critical consumer of speeches and people in the media?
Well, if you can repeat it or watch something, let's say on one of the streaming channels, and if you turn off the sound and watch the body language, there's one technique that you can see how they're connecting. And you can go back to the classic documentaries, Triumph of Will, Lenny Riefenstahl, who photographed Hitler during the rise of the Nazis. And you just turn off the sound and you see the pageantry, even in black and white, it's powerful. And so images connect. And I like what you said about remembering in your mind using images. And so if we study those, we understand how we connect with each other visually. Because whether it's a smile or whether it's how we dress, I always like to wear a white shirt when I speak in public because you can outline and see my face better. For a female, you want to make sure, at least my preference is not to have dangly things from their earrings because I'm focusing there rather than their mouth and what they're saying. So you want to be aware of that. Some people complain that my backdrop with all my books is a little bit schizophrenic for them, or they're trying to see what am I reading, and I understand that. So you want to you want your voice, but you also have the visual to get people to connect with you. It's very important to know how you're being presented. Watch a TED Talk. I mean, those are usually anywhere from 14 to 17, 18 minutes. Watch how they do it. They have a center spot. They have slides behind them, but they go from a story or an idea to a story, and it's all mostly words. It's not as much as visual. But think about how visually you want the audience to remember and how they're connecting your movement. So you want to move with purpose. And a lot of people will just, it's like ping pong. It's back and forth and they're moving back and forth. And that sometimes can be very annoying.
Mm,
But people don't use all of the stage. If you're in a place where you can move a lot and there's visuals that you can bring with you, bring them because people connect those visuals. But they often forget they can go on a diagonal when they speak. So you can, if you want to feel like something is getting diminished or smaller, you can go backwards when you speak. And then when you're feeling more confident and talking about being confident, you can move out to the front of the stage. Or you can talk about staging from the standpoint of when you began, where you are today, and where you want to go in the future. And then come back to center, and then you can just reference those points. So there's a lot of physical that you can do that attracts to your message, but you just don't want to go back and forth like you're watching a tennis match. That
right.
can be very distracting.
And so if I'm watching somebody, they're an extremely effective speaker, they're using the stage in the manner that you're recommending, and they have great cadence and pacing, and they're using the volume of their voice to go up and bring the audience with them and, back down. How how can I not, or like, am I supposed to get sucked in, or how do I stay a critical listener of this person who is employing these techniques? We have a commenter saying, for example, somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy, great public speaker. He connects with you. I actually got to see him in person at an event in Greenwich here. They brought him in to speak, and yeah, he's very personable, looks you in the eyes. Like, how do you see through these people to make sure that you're not just getting sucked into the narrative?
Well, one of the best ways is to have a question. If you know who you're going to go see, you know, see him speak, maybe there's a burning question that you want to ask if there's a Q&A opportunity or meeting them afterwards. You can say, I heard you say this. How do you square that with your actions? Or you want to do this. I always like politicians because they say, oh, they're going to help me. Personally, I don't need any more help. I get plenty of help from myself and my immediate family. So I don't need your help. What I want you to do is protect my equal, universal, natural rights. And oh, by the way, have you ever read our state constitution? And most local candidates have never read their state constitution, which is what they're supposed to be doing if they're going to be our elected representatives.
Mm,
So, you can have questions like that. I'm a little leery of a lot of people, but when there's humor, because especially humor from, comedians are wonderful. They reveal the truth with humor. And a lot of times they say stuff that may be off color, may be a little bit blue, but they speak the truth because a lot of comedy is farce. A lot of comedy is based on the reality of the situation. So you've got to think about, okay, is it a commercial or are they speaking authentically? Or are they just trying to get something from me? Because the audience is always saying, what's in it for me?
well,
Right?
yeah, and hopefully, I guess the speaker, right? The speaker's like, "Alright, we wanna get down that guard," so they're not thinking about themselves, and they're just taking in my message, and what you're saying is, okay, you might get swept up in the speech like that, but if you come in prepared, right, before they start speaking, or if you know who's gonna be speaking that night, you can sort of pre-plan, like, pre-ground yourself, like, remind
Right.
yourself, "What is the real issue at stake?" Because 'Cause I'm sure they're gonna come in and tell me some story about, you know, why, God came to them and told them they had to run for the office or whatever their story is, right? Some grand story where like, wow, this guy, man, he's got passion and he's committed and he's so, vivacious and he's a great public speaker, but if you prepare and you remind yourself, okay, what are the basics of he's supposed to be doing? Then once they finish your speech and you're done getting all swept up in how, I guess Obama is another one who comes to mind for me, a great public speaker. Every time I'd hear the guy speak, I'd be like, "Yes, hope and change." And then I'd be like, "Hold on, hold on, hold on. What are we really talking about?" You know? Um, so there's preparation even to being a listener, not just to being a public speaker.
And what you're saying, Stephanie, is you want to be connected with the speaker, but you also want to be critical. And that's why I like the idea of Toastmasters, because we're constantly evaluating everything we do. We have a grammarian, we have a timer, we have a evaluator if you're doing a prepared speech who's going to give you feedback from their perspective of what they saw, what they heard, how they felt by listening to your presentation. Now you can take it for what it's worth, or you can just say, hey, chuck it, and I'm just going to do what I'm going to do. But if you really want the feedback from people who are watching you and listening to you, then you should take bits and pieces and figure out how you can do it better the next time. So what a lot of times when people who are professional speakers, the Tony Robbins of the world, they record themselves and they're looking for little nuances that connect with an audience. Comedians do it all the time. If you ever get a chance to do 5 minutes of comedy of original material, you will be very attentive of what you're saying and where the, like you said earlier, where the laughs are coming from. You may have just said something off the cuff, and all of a sudden over here somebody's cracking up. Wait a minute, what connected me with that person to make them laugh? And that one little, joke or one little connection might run into a whole presentation. So doing improv, being able to just act extemporaneously is a great skill set to learn, because when you connect with an audience, it makes all the difference in the world. You never know, it could be two people in the audience or it could be 10,000, but you never know who you're going to change, who you're going to affect, who you're going to make even better than when they came in to hear you. I get excited when I hear people or when I get a chance to speak, because I never know who I'm going to meet, number one. But number two, maybe somebody needed to hear the message I was talking about today. And I've heard incredible stories about people who were thinking about doing terrible things to themselves, but somebody said something. Could have been a smile, could have been a movement, could have been one or two words or a sentence, but really put them back on a right path. And it was either the voice, the authenticity, the emotion, or just some connecting word that made him stop and say, I'm not going to go down that path. I'm going to do something positive in my life. So it's powerful.
And so I'm wondering here, we have our friend Terrible Schools here. He's a teacher. I met him actually in Colorado at the Teacher Freedom Festival. But he lives down south. I forget exactly where. One of those places in middle America that you need a map to remind yourself where it is. But he's running for city commissioner, and he says people are constantly asking him to say things when crowds gather. So I believe this is his first time running for office. Um, what would be your advice to somebody who's just getting out there and wants to sort of like refine their skills? Like, what would be the thing that they could go home and do, over the next week, and then next week they'll come out, people will be like, "Oh, this guy's got some good to say. We got to listen to him."
Well, one of the things is, going through the leadership program of the Rockies, if you're talking about things for public officials, you always want to talk about principles, because when you're on principles, you're on bedrock. So I make sure that I'm either talking about individual rights, the proper role of government, how to be an active, engaged citizen, human equality, uh, consent of the governed, something I know that is based on bedrock. And I often will talk about the cardinal virtues, temperance, justice, prudence, and fortitude. Or oftentimes we'll talk about morals, being decent or indecent, good or bad, freedom versus force. So I could pick one or two of those ideas and have the ability to speak. I always have one or two stories that I like to book in with, and I like to always offer hope at the end. I don't want to reprimand people or tell people what to do, but I want to give them the ability. I mean, Obama, like you mentioned, was a great communicator because he always offered hope.
Mm,
Now, hope itself is not a strategy, but I like to turn that around and talk about, like, Charles Revson, the owner of Revlon. He said, in the perfume counters of America, we sell perfume and we make perfume in the factory, but we also prepare people and give them hope because of the aroma and the idea
right.
of, why does a lady wear perfume on her neck? She's hopeful. And so you want to give that kind of visual to people. And you also want to get people to walk away going, I feel better than when I came in. I connected with some idea. That's huge.
Yeah, and I think that this podcast has been a great example of having these little tidbits sort of ready to go. I mean, you use them all the time, but you're seeing different people. They don't know that. It's the first time that they've heard it. So I would say to our friend out there who's running for office, do a brainstorming session of some stories, or first of all, like, what's your platform, right? And then connect your platform to some of your own personal stories, and then maybe look up some quotes, right? And have 5 stories, 5 quotes, and then your 2 or 3 platform items and principles that you can connect those to, and
Mhm.
reuse, recycle. You'll get better at telling them and refining them down.
The other
Uh,
thing that you'll be able to do too is you can say, "Hey, I have 3 main ideas I like to talk about." So if it's somebody running for an elected office, you can say the economy, our education system, and how we're going to be, civil to each other when we're having discussions. But today I want to talk about the first one. Now you can be in a different venue, same 3 ideas in the beginning, but today I want to talk about this. One, it keeps you fresh, but you have this 3 and you stay on message all the time. Where people start to lose is when they get off message.
mm,
And the reason they do is somebody asks them a question. So this is a classic one. I worked on a campaign here in Colorado back in 2009, and they kept bringing up the abortion issue. Well, the problem with the abortion issue at that time was that it was a federal, you had, the federal law there wasn't back at the states. So it didn't matter what the local discussion was, the federal law was what it was at the time. Now it's back in the states, but they kept bugging the candidate I was working with. And he said, I'm more interested in wanting to know what you're thinking, not what
mm.
I'm thinking, what I might do, but what you're thinking. Because we may agree or disagree, but reasonable people can disagree. And that laid the groundwork. Reasonable people can disagree. And that brings the emotion out of it. And that's why our founding fathers understood the difference between the passions and the principles. And we have our better angels and we have our animal angels, and we're that thing in between being a human being, and we have both. So we have to tamp down the passions, and we have to aspire to those things that are the good, the true, and the beautiful.
Wow, I think that I'm gonna have to rewatch this episode with my notebook, paper, and pen, and freshen up some of my skills here and take some of this advice. This has been an amazing episode, and I hope really useful and valuable to people out there. We talk all the time about different ideas, and a lot of times I do like current events, like what's in the news, what's in this. Whereas I think this is important because this is timeless. You can take it anywhere, apply it to any topic, whether it's politics or sports or just talking to your friend in the neighborhood. So I hope that you've had out your pen and paper this episode. I hope that you've hit that like button. And if you're just finding your way here, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We go live every Monday night around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And Bradley, you've been an amazing guest. I just want to remind people real quick that they can find you over at bradleycraigbeck.com. Is there anywhere else where people should find you? Anything else you have coming up where people can check you out?
Sure, I'm at Twitter at Bradley_Beck. I'm on LinkedIn and on Truth Social and Getter and all the Clubhouse. You can find me.
Okay.
You can just Google Bradley Beck or Bradley Craig Beck, and I'm pretty much findable. So
All right, so make sure you definitely do that. We have some love from the comments here. It's been a great episode, cheat codes, and he's running for city commissioner. So I know he's going to go and put this information to work. If you have a friend out there who's running for office, it's a big election year. Make sure you send them this video. It's like free development for their candidate. They don't have to go pay somebody to put on a training. They can watch this. And if you have any questions, reach out to Bradley on one of his channels or leave a comment down below and I'll make sure that he gets it. And that's all we have for you tonight. I appreciate you guys checking in. Remember, think free, live free, and give all the glory to God.